Uh, and as usual, we have a lot to discuss. So let's get going. For our top news story, there are currently no laws governing digital reincarnation. Microsoft built this chat with the dead chatbot in 2017, but didn't release it. But says Richard, maybe I would like to chat with my dead brother. So we now have chatbots that resurrect the dead, with legal experts weighing in on this disturbing technology. So in a little while, we'll be talking about that for our top news story. Technology story. Artificial intelligence research continues to grow as China overtakes the United States in journal citations on artificial intelligence. So China is overtaking, and this isn't good for the US. For our materials, and once again, a graph story, now we've got new stuff on graphene, which apparently has new skills. Tunable lattice vibrations. Oh, Richard, we'll really look forward to that. For our space story, the warp drive, many of you will know, has long been a sci-fi staple. But now we have a potential model for it. Wow. And in environment, we are now beginning to cut carbon. But, says Richard, we need to do a lot more. We need, in fact, a tenfold increase in carbon dioxide emissions cuts in order to stem climate emergency. For our biology story, here are 4 senses animals have that we don't. Would you like more senses? They can perceive some things better than we can. Now, in terms of us, this basic income experiment in Stockton, California, has spectacular outcome for progressives and the COVID relief package. They found it doesn't rob the incentive to work. Indeed, it increased the number of people working. Now, for our medical health issue, scientists use a novel ink with calcium to 3D print bone using living cells. Interesting. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And now, Richard, for our top news story, what's this about chatbots can resurrect the dead, with legal experts weighing in on this?
Well, the story was introduced with the recent revelation that in 2017, 4 years ago, Microsoft patented a chat box that used AI and machine learning that let you digitally resurrect the dead. And the proposed chat box then would let friends and family continue their interaction and talking with you, even though you're not in the room anymore. And it's interesting at one level that Microsoft developed the chat with dead grandpa and didn't release it. But it turns out when you look at this kind of issue in general, most people in the modern world leave behind a ton of digital data. And it's enough data to teach AI programs enough about you and your conversational idiosyncrasies that they can then reconstruct how you would talk and use that then to power the chat with the dead chat box. I guess it wouldn't be Alexa You wouldn't say, Alexa, you would say, Grandpa, and he would answer you. It turns out there are currently no laws anywhere in the world governing digital reincarnation. This is another case where technology is way ahead of laws. And your right to privacy after you're dead is not assured by any means. There's still problems with your right to privacy when you're alive. And there are currently no ways to opt out of being digitally reconstructed. And it turns out that the legal questions involved are surprisingly complicated about what happens to your data after you die. And there are not specific laws around the world. And so the whole issue is a significant kind of issue, and it's one of the kind of issues that we have to deal with in the future. And I thought it's a good story to lead with because it ought to create some interesting discussion today. So let's have at it. Do you want to be preserved for your grandchildren or children? What do you think about this whole thing?
Any comments?
Well, it's eerie, if nothing else.
Yeah, because your electronic record is kind of a skewed appreciation of what you're interested in, and they might only come back with all those websites that you've been looking at,
Oh,
and
no.
your grandchildren would get the wrong idea. There's more to the old guy than just those websites.
Uh-huh. Do you think when after you die and you're the funeral director asks, well, would you like a digital reconstruction of your dead loved one? How would you answer?
He would ask that the person who had been deceased.
No, you ask it to the rest of them. Wise guy.
Will the dead person continue to get a lot of spam?
Probably.
But
You could-
already the papers that we've presented and the articles we've written are immortalized.
At
What-
least
what do
yours
we-
are. I don't know about mine, but yes, sir.
Thoughts?
Yeah, I think the problem wouldn't be with people who you know are dead, but you could get a kind of somebody saying, hey, I'm your long lost uncle. Remember me? Send money.
Yes.
So Richard, this is just reconstruction based on what the person was like they sort of make up what the person would do based on what he did when he was alive. He or she?
Here the current techniques use what they can find about you on the web from Facebook and stuff to kind of try to understand your idiosyncrasies so that they can build that into their reconstruction of your voice so you can have a conversation with your kids that you might have had.
I'm not sure, but I don't think they can find your voice. They can make a profile. I mean, it's like when you were being interviewed for a job, people form an idea of you by asking certain questions. And so I can see how they could do that. To just have a profile of a person, and then when you ask questions to the deceased, they will come up with an answer that would sort of be in the vein of the person who is not really there.
Maybe they could also get the dying person or the person who thinks they're going to die to sign up for their service and record their voice so they had a good way to reconstruct the voice too. I know this is a problem. This is an actual problem for media figures because they are able to, they have lots of voice information and visual information with them. And this is an ongoing issue in copyright law around the world, is how do you deal with copyrights for ownership for a dead person?
I'm a speech pathologist, and for years I had worked with ALS patients, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. And one of the things they did was they lost all their communication. And just as I was retiring, they started coming in with a system in which you would tape a certain, we would have them read while they had good voice, a paragraph, so that when you got them on a computer and they had lost their speech, their voice was pretty good. So that was a while ago. So that's, the voice is definitely there, you know?
Interesting.
We've been hearing a lot about artificial intelligence, and many people think this is the huge issue of the future. And China, in AI journal citations, overtakes the United States in that. And what does this mean? Is China going to be ruling the world in artificial intelligence? Is this good for the United States? Any thoughts? Richard.
Okay. One of the things is the AI research is still exploding around the world. And in 2020, there was about a 35% increase in publications from 2019 around the world. And, that's a big increase. And also in 2020, the Chinese citations overpassed those from the USA just in terms of total gross numbers. Now, in AI conferences, the US is still in the lead with citations, and these particular kind of citations are an indication of the novelty and significance of the underlying research. So maybe the US is not losing as bad as they can. And money around the world is continuing to now be poured in to this AI research. And it's kind of interesting because the investors, instead of placing their bets in a lot of different baskets, trying to spread the risk, rather they are concentrating their investments on fewer and fewer companies. And it's like the investors expect that the winner take all dynamic that shows up in other web applications that have dominated the tech industry will be replicated in the AI world. And they're presently in the research trend, there is a lot of AI in the industrialization of computer vision. This is one of the enabling technologies to be able to look at objects, for example, in a manufacturing line and be able to detect the edges so you can have your robot deal with it. Related to this is much cheaper and more powerful computer generated visual media. And you probably already heard about this as a risk factor for fake news, because now you can have, it's a lot easier to have fake pictures as well as fake stories. One of the areas that has exploded last year, not surprisingly, was research in drug discovery and design. That research increased by nearly a factor of 5. So that's one of the things that is a real big reason. We can guess why, and it's certainly turned out to be immensely productive. And now there's some other areas that are big. There is OpenAI's text generation program, GPT-3. You know, this is the thing, the writing program. It was interesting to me that I got email ads from some company that was saying, do you have problems generating copy for your website and things like this? You know, fresh copies keep attracting new eyeballs, and it's a pain in the ass finding writers and stuff like this. And for only $50 a month, we have this program that in 36 different areas, you just give it a topic sentence, and in a few minutes we'll give you the article. So this is from the GPT-3. It was interesting enough to me that I dug down a little bit and still found that I would rather write the articles myself, and they didn't have much on meditation and stuff that I'm interested in, but there were a lot of areas that they cover. And you know, there is one area though that AI continues to struggle with, and that is ethics. There are a lot of companies that are paying lip service to official ethical principles, some of whom we have heard about in the news, like Google, who recently fired their top ethical officer. They were probably saying something they were doing was bad. And while companies are happy to pay lip service, these commitments are not binding, and they can still go off and do anything they want. And some of us are suspicious of that freedom that they have. And anyway, so that's the overview of AI research.
Any thoughts?
Just shaking your head, John. I see it.
Well, it's overwhelming, you know, and the ethics thing in particular. I used to be. I'm no longer a member, but I'm still on the mailing list of the ethical union in the U.S. They haven't been writing about that, but they should address that potential problem.
Mm-hmm.
It is a great problem, and that the Chinese are exploiting it to the degree that they are, and we're lagging behind means bad things.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
I wonder, by the way, the Chinese, do you suppose that they express themselves when they do papers in the Chinese characters, or do they use regular and like English for that.
I suspect a lot of them are written in English because still English is the international language of science.
That's what I thought. Right.
Also, interestingly, about the Chinese are the most active country in the world about trying to digitally monitor their whole population. And for them, that AI is a critical tool in population control.
Mm.
Like face recognition.
Pardon that?
Face recognition.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. But that's more than facial recognition because you still want to
Yeah.
figure
the
out
big
what the guy
danger-
is up to.
Yeah. The big danger is identifying vulnerable people. And so, you know, kind of, all the time I'm watching things like my spell checker.
We lost your voice,
You're
Clive.
muted.
He's not muted. We just lost his voice.
Ah, okay. Well, then maybe we can move on from artificial intelligence to our materials and graphene story. And now we have new stuff on graphene with new skills. What's this about tunable lattice vibrations, Richard?
Well, I know always these material and graphene stories have a lot of audience involvement, as I kid about this. Technological innovation for the last century was really based on our ability and increasing ability to control the flow of electrons. And now it's moving into the control of photons. And one of the issues in photons is that the devices that you use to control them up until now have operated at fixed vibrational frequencies. And what they have done is develop techniques with graphene to be able to change the frequency of the vibrations that you're controlling and generating with the graphene. They basically use lasers, drill patterns of holes in the graphene, and then by applying different voltages, like what the engineers would call a gate voltage, to the graphene, they're able to change the frequency of the photons that are coming from the graphene. And this, maybe one way you can compare it is the difference in this is the difference between Morse code, beep, 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 to hi-fi audio. And this enormously will open up their ability to do complex things with light that we have not been able to even consider doing to date. And it's another trick from this flat carbon called graphene.
Any
Well,
thought?
would this be a move away from digital processing to more analog processing, or
Yep.
and fuzzy logic and that sort of thing?
Right. Yes. That's, again, that's one viewpoint, and I think that's a good perception. And so again, you can see why I think it's significant. It's a big deal.
Sounds like more stuff we won't understand.
Oh, I'm sure of that.
You know, I'm totally innocent on knowing anything about these things, and I'm trying to figure out what is that you can do with light. It's interesting. He gives some examples, so simple souls like I understand it.
Well, one of the ways to look at it is one thing they're doing with the light is they're substituting what they could do before with electronics with doing it with light instead. And light is, of course, faster than electricity, and light uses a lot less energy than electricity. So one thing that they're going to be able to do with that is a lot more of the same stuff that they already know how to do, and they can do it at a lot lower energy cost. And this energy cost of computing and all of this stuff is already almost 10% of the energy in the world goes to power these computer chips. And that is increasing significantly every year. And one thing that we're going to have to do to save the planet is figure out how to have our snazzy technology and not burn so much power.
Yeah.
So that's one thing we're going to get out of it.
Interesting.
If we move on from graphene to space, some people in sci-fi have talked a lot about the warp drive. And Richard, can you tell us what is the warp drive? And now, what is this about having a potential model for actually being able to do it?
Well, the first part of what is a warp drive is I've read science fiction for 60 years, and it was a device the science fiction writers used so that they could have stories that you could go from here to there in enough time to keep the novel going. You know, because if we're going to have space travel and it takes 2,000 years, then it's got to be a long, boring book. And then about 20 years ago or so, there was a physicist who I think was named Alcubierre, who came up with the idea of a warp drive in 1994. And in his vision, now the problem, of course, going faster than light is that you can't go faster than light. So the sci-fi guys envision something like maybe if you just fold up space and instead of going around the surface, you went through the middle, you could get there faster. Was one view of the way they're doing it. What this physicist said is he envisioned a system where a spacecraft could contract space-time in front of the vehicle while expanding it behind the vehicle, and the end result was the vehicle could move faster than the speed of light without violating the existing laws of physics. And when he initially did it, his calculations were such that it would take an enormous amount of energy, an inconceivable amount of energy. And then a few years ago, he announced he had done some refinements of the physics and believe it could be done with just the kind of energy you could release by converting 400 kilograms of matter into energy. That's still, of course, more energy than in any of the present fusion bombs or things like that. So it's a lot of energy. Anyway, these people here now have created a new model of this, and so these models move it closer to where it might be possible. They still, though, the warp drive created from the model that they have done, they still says it could not be built today, but suggests someday we can make it.
Any thoughts?
Yeah.
Well, if we can eliminate the idea of physical travel, if you want to go someplace, and just somehow or another and transport our observation possibilities, rather than being there in person, then I think we can move pretty quick.
Well, this would travel to the next planet faster than your radio signal.
I mean, this will be a matter of thought almost. If you somehow or another can accumulate the information you need, you can then what do you call it, bridge the distance, just in your mind's eye, and then take whatever observations you want. So then that would take like a blink of an eye, and you would move to wherever you want to go. You need to have some information to begin with.
Our story isn't about going somewhere else. It's being able to somehow deal with what's happening right here. And apparently been cutting carbon emissions somewhat. But, says Richard, and this story, we need to do far more of cutting carbon emissions if we're going to prevent this huge emergency. Richard, what's that about?
Well, there's good news and bad news. And the good news is that around the world, 64 countries have cut their fossil fuel CO2 emissions in the 2016 to 2019 period. So we're starting to see the needle move a little bit on the clean, non-polluting energy. The problem is that what they have done so far is they have cut 0.016 billion tons of CO2 out of what we are polluting the atmosphere with, and we need to reduce the CO2 by somewhere between 1 and 2 billion tons. So what we've done so far is only about 10% of what we need to do. And while we decreased emissions in 64 countries, they increased in 150 countries. And so there is going to be another global meeting this November where countries around the world will recalibrate their commitments. But as these numbers show, commitments are not enough. We actually need real tangible action, and the way we can measure the results of that action is by how much crap we're putting in the air each year.
Any thoughts?
Well, it's a little bit of spin there too, because they talk about the numbers of countries, but a lot of those countries have a population of less than 1 million people. They're these little islands in the Pacific and places like that. And it's all making out that half the countries in the world are doing better, but the reality is on a total volumetric basis, it's trivial, the improvements in a lot of these countries.
Well, that's why I think the significant number here is not the number of countries or something like that, but then the total CO2 emissions into the atmosphere. And for me, the significant number is the 0.16 billion tons of CO2 reduction in that 3-year period, when what we need is 1 to 2 billion tons.
I think the biggest offenders actually are China, India, and the United States. And all three don't seem to have the political will to do what it takes, or even for that matter, the technology. No.
The U.S. effort in methane reduction currently offers great hope. By detecting methane leakage, we can, because methane is what, 20 times as bad as carbon dioxide?
Something like that, yes.
So reducing methane emissions, say with better animal feed and detecting methane leakages, offers a quick, inexpensive way to substantially reduce the problem.
Another problem with methane that you talked about a little bit is the methane leakage, which is actually an enormous problem, and one which we don't know how big the problem is really, because we don't have good data on that. One of the specific suggestions that is actually starting to be done in places is to change building codes to eliminate the use of natural gas in homes.
Natural gas being methane, that's kind of logical.
Yes, yes.
I also think that we need somehow to come up with a fuel that's so much cheaper than the kind of free fuel that we use now for transportation, that it's ludicrous to continue to use that, the current kind of fuel. I don't know if we can do that. I mean, the electricity, of course, is the one thing that comes to mind, but the change to electricity, some companies have committed to it, GM among others, I believe, by a certain year, but it's a long ways off yet, and nothing much seems to be happening.
One of the other things, an alternate for transportation that they are investigating rapidly and starting to use in some places is hydrogen. Hydrogen trains, hydrogen airplanes, hydrogen jets, hydrogen large transport trucks. So hydrogen actually is a good non-polluting fuel, and we are at the level where we can start to produce it economically.
How far away do you think we are?
I don't know. Right now, what we need, some of the things like General Motors has decided that their large trucks will be converted into hydrogen, and they're saying 2025 is their plan to do it. That's still a small piece of the problem. Airbus in Europe already has a jet that they are testing using hydrogen instead of jet fuel. And that test has been going on now for about a year. So it's been going on long enough where they have starting to have real understanding about how to use it. The hydrogen train, I'm not sure what the status is on that. I thought that was just something that is getting started. So
Yes,
the conversion to hydrogen is really in its beginning days, but it's in its beginning days. If you see any of these graphs about rates of change, particularly in technical areas, but around the world, what you see is this curve that for a long time, it's hard to see it's a curve because it looks pretty much like a straight line. And then there comes a time where there's an inflection point and you start to be able to notice the curve. Right now, I think hydrogen is not yet to the inflection point.
no, that's for sure. Another problem is that once we have a way to transport ourselves and materials with powered by, let's say, hydrogen, then a lot of countries, like for instance the one that we're in, Mexico and other countries, they cannot afford to buy those vehicles, and it'll be a long time before they can catch up. And I think that's the majority of the world, that's driving with discarded vehicles.
Well, for most of those vehicles, the electric vehicle is what is going to happen and is going to happen first. And the electric, personal transportation and autos are such a big part of the transportation pollution that converting the fleet of internal combustion engine cars to electric is the thing that's going to give us the most bang for the buck. And that is happening. If you look this year around the world at the number of good EVs that are available from a bunch of different countries, you start to see the transition to EVs is happening, and it's way beyond the great work that Tesla is doing.
It all depends where you're going to get the electricity from.
Sure.
And then with
course.
the reluctance to go for nuclear power, they're going to continue to use fossil fuels for electricity.
There's still that change, though. If you look at what's happening, like in the US last year, more than half of the new power that was added in the US was renewable, wind and solar. So that change is happening.
Yeah.
If you,
Yeah.
Well, Richard, maybe we need to move on to our biology story. And what's this about some animals having senses we don't have? 4 senses to be explicit. And would you like to have more of these things? Tell us about it.
Now, on the would you like to have more senses, there's a movement called transhumanism, I think it is, where some people are already installing devices to give them new senses. There's one guy I read about who has had special sensors put in his feet so he can feel vibrations in the floor better. So I guess he's trying to be a self-powered earthquake detector. I'm not sure what his motivations are. But anyway, of existing things, the looking at the animal kingdom is interesting as a way to be able to compare what humans are able to do. One of those senses is echolocation. You know about bats, also toothed whales, and other tree-dwelling shrews. I'm not sure what those are besides bats, then are able to use special ear and brain adaptations where they can build three-dimensional models based on sound pictures that they're able to create from their surroundings. So the first of those senses is echolocation. The next is infrared and ultraviolet vision. Rattlesnakes, for example, they use their eyes during the day, but at night they employ infrared sensory organs to detect and hunt warm-blooded prey. Also, there are other animals, including eagles, hedgehogs, and shrimp, that can see using ultraviolet spectrum. Humans can't use either ultra-red or ultraviolet. Uh, the best we can do is have these guys that you see in the videos with their night goggles on, where everything is green and black, using infrared detectors. The next sense is the electric sense. We know about electric fields done by electric eels, of course, but this goes way beyond that. And other fish, including many sharks, use the weaker electric fields to help them navigate murky waters. Bony fish and some frogs possess lateral lines on either sides of their bodies that give them sensors to be able to detect electrical currents in the water. That makes a lot of sense there, because like they say, the water's murky sometimes and you need to see anyway. The fourth sense is the magnetic sense. And animals possessing a magnetic sense can orient themselves in specific directions and navigate long distances, like many of the birds. And it turns out it's not limited to birds that use this magnetic sense. They include, this is a fairly diverse group, honeybees, sharks, turtles, homing pigeons, migratory birds, tuna, and salmon. They all have this magnetic sense. Now, we don't actually know how they do it yet, but we know that they do it yet. And so, you know, the way we understand the world is limited and defined by our sense perceptions. And we humans have a pretty puny array of this. And it's not, there are animals that can see and perceive more than we can. And maybe through the use of some of these new technologies, we could even do more ourselves.
Any thoughts?
Yes, actually, I've been studying colors for many years, and it's interesting that some animals, some fish, they have 12 cones where we have 3. And there's actually what they call the forbidden colors that we can't see because they cancel out. For example, green and red and yellow and blue, they produce a color that we haven't been able to see because they cancel out in our eyes.
Yes, yes.
Very interesting.
And we don't have a name for it because we can't see it.
Exactly.
Well, when
else?
those electric eels stun another fish, how do they avoid getting electrocuted themselves?
I don't know. Good question. They wear rubber gloves.
So what I think is interesting is that, you know, we have 5 senses, and when humans lose the ability to use one of them, like if you lose your eyes, for example, if you lose your hearing. They say that the other senses develop better in order to do that. So I'm wondering if in some way that if you lost multiple senses and if you followed propensities, you might be able to develop some of these other senses.
I hope so. I've been losing my hearing for 20 years and I keep waiting for what you're talking about, Suzanne.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping that my other senses are going to get better than my eyesight too.
The sense that we should be trying to develop is common sense. And that seems to be
I think we may need an AI implant for that.
yeah.
And does that mean common sense would be determined by Google, connected brain Google?
I guess so.
Now, talking about common sense, many of us think that common sense means we need a basic income modus vivendi. And apparently, this experiment Stocktown has spectacular outcome. It finds that if you get more money, you don't, you still want to work. And in fact, it means that more people are working. What's that about, Richard?
Now, there have been multiple experiments of universal basic income, UBI, and all of them have been positive. The latest one is the Stockton experiment, and there for 2 years, they gave a small group of people, 125, just $500 a month. And the people could spend it however they wanted to spend it. They were not obligated to complete any forms, drug tests, interviews, or any of that. There were no work requirements. It was just money. And one of the issues in America particularly is poverty is used as a cudgel to get people to work. And this experiment actually tested that idea. And what they found was that is not true at all. And in Stockton, on that particular part of the experiment, then participants with a full-time job rose 12 percentage point in the group that was getting this minimal UBI, and in the control group, it was only 5 points. So the people starting full-time work was more than twice as high in the group that got this UBI. And so the results look like more work, less destitution, more family stability, less stress, less homelessness, fewer skipped meals. And one specific thing is the parents not needing to work 2 or 3 jobs, even when the kids are doing homework. And so there were fewer of the people who were in that kind of extreme personal stress situation with UBI. And so this experiment that was well controlled and well studied scientifically is another thing that says the argument that we hear from the right that giving people free money dismotivates them and they're just going to lay around and get drunk and stuff like this. By the way, the people who got their $500, there were no limits on what they could spend it for, and about 1% of their income went to tobacco and alcohol. So it looks like people were not supporting their bad habits, but they were using the money for life essentials.
Any thoughts?
Yes, in the United States, many of us of age receive universal basic income in the form of Social Security. And it has not destroyed the country, and it's not destroyed the old people in the country.
Thank goodness for SSI. That's why I can afford to be in Mexico. Otherwise, it might have to be Guyana or someplace like that.
But there is an argument that Social Security or whatever was pension contributions paid for by employers and by people.
Right.
And that in many ways, the government has misused it. They've used it for general expenses and just counted on future taxpayers to pay the pension.
Yep.
But the effect of large portions of the American populace receiving universal basic income has not damaged the country. It's been good, no
Right.
matter how it was funded.
Right.
Well, Richard, with a little bit of time left, can you tell us about how we can 3D print bone with living cells?
Well, this is certainly interesting from a medical news. Then 3D printers may become a permanent fixture in operating rooms. And what these guys were able to do is they came up with a ceramic-based ink that can be printed in situ is their word, and that means in the person's body, in the bone from the person laying on the table. And this 3D ink that they use can come with living cells, so it's easy to integrate and damage bone tissue. And so it could be that if you have a bone problem or even a severe break or something like that, that they can 3D print the bone replacement that you need to heal your problem right there in your body while you're laying on the table. And of course, one place that we're familiar with that people are using bone implants all the time now is the dentist office. And so the same technology would allow the dentist to give you a new crown. I don't think they can put the nerves in yet, but they can build it out of living tissue, which is a lot more stable than non-living tissue. And so this is a new way that we will be able to use 3D printing. This is still early stage and they have to go through animal testing and human testing and all of that stuff. But this is going to revolutionize the doctors working with human bone on human patients.
Any thoughts?
It's a good idea.
Yeah. What's that?
It's a good idea. They'll be
Yes.
doing all manner of stuff like that.
You know, I need a little clarification now. And when they do in situ injection, do they actually remove the diseased bone first and leave a cavity and fill it up?
Yes.
Or do they infuse the actual diseased bone and make it whole again?
I would think they do what they need to in the situation, and it would be different for different situations. But again, what they will be able to do is, while you're laying there on the table, is they will be able to take the kind of images they need to take to understand exactly what to do and how to shape it and how to fit it in with your existing tissue. And I think if they have to remove some tissue, they will deal with that as well. Good question.
Well, Richard, thanks a lot for getting away from dealing with your blood clot to being able to deal with us again on Hot Science. And we certainly wish your blood clot goes away and all that future. And we look to seeing you again next week and everybody else as well. So thanks very much, everybody. Bye for now.
Bye.
Good to see
Thank
you.
you.
Be well, Richard.
Take care.
Thank you. It's good to feel good enough to be able to do this. So
Yeah.
thank you guys for joining me.
Okay, and you know, if you need help, Richard, you know, I'm not very far, just so you know.
Okay. Adios.
It is. How do I